Mom's sick, so I came instead. When 10-year-old Emily marched into a billionaire's office to take her mother's interview, security rushed to remove her. The billionaire prepared to throw her out. But what he did next was unbelievable. The giant glass doors of the skyscraper did not look like they opened for people like Emily. Inside that building was the only chance to save her family from eviction. But the interview was in 20 minutes, and her mother couldn't even lift her head from the pillow. The morning light was gray and unforgiving as it pushed through the thin curtains of the small apartment. It highlighted the dust motes dancing in the cold air. The heating had been turned off 3 days ago. It was a choice between warmth and food, and Mary had chosen food for her daughter. In the corner of the room, Mary sat on the edge of the mattress, her body trembling. A deep, rattling cough shook her thin frame, sounding loud in the quiet room. She held a phone to her ear with a hand that was pale and shaking. "Please," Mary said, her voice raspy and weak. "I just need to reschedule. It is just a fever. I will be fine by tomorrow." Emily sat at the small, scratched kitchen table 10 feet away. She was 10 years old, with blonde hair pulled back in a severe, neat ponytail. She watched her mother with eyes that had seen too much worry for such a young face. She chewed on her lower lip, listening to the voice on the other end of the line. Even from here, the voice sounded tinny, sharp, and impatient. "Ms. Davis," the voice on the phone snapped. "Miller Enterprises does not reschedule. We have 50 applicants for this cleaning position. If you are not in the lobby at 9 a.m. sharp, we move to the next name on the list. That is the policy." "But I have been preparing," Mary pleaded, tears gathering in her eyes. "I know I can do the job. I just need 9 a.m. or do not bother coming at all." The line clicked dead. Mary lowered the phone slowly. Her shoulders slumped, and she let out a sob that turned into another violent fit of coughing. She curled onto her side, pulling the thin quilt up to her chin. The fever was burning through her, stealing her strength, stealing her fight. Emily stood up. She walked over to the bed and placed a cool hand on her mother's burning forehead. "Mama?" she whispered. "I'm sorry, Emmy," Mary murmured, her eyes closing. "I'm so sorry. I ruined it. I ruined it all. Sleep now. It's okay." But it wasn't okay. Emily knew exactly how not okay it was. She looked at the calendar on the wall. The date, eviction, was circled in red ink just 3 days away. This job wasn't just a job. It was the difference between this drafty apartment and the shelter downtown. Mary's breathing slowed as the exhaustion and the medicine she had taken earlier finally pulled her into a restless sleep. Emily stepped back. She looked around the room. It was clean, spotless actually. Her mother scrubbed floors for a living, and she kept their home immaculate, even if the furniture was secondhand and the rug was threadbare. On the small dresser stood a framed photograph, the only thing of value they owned. It was a black and white photo of an older man in a uniform. He stood straight, jaw set, eyes kind but fierce. Grandpa Frank. He had been a sergeant in the army. He had died 2 years ago, but Emily still talked to him in her head. "Fear is a reaction. Courage is a decision," he used to tell her. "When the hill gets steep, the soldier keeps climbing." Emily looked at her mother, defeated and asleep. Then she looked at the photo. "I can't let her lose this, Grandpa," she whispered to the empty room. Her gaze drifted to the chair where Mary had laid out her clothes the night before. A clean white blouse, ironed until it was crisp, black slacks, and the leather folder. The folder was old. It had belonged to Grandpa Frank. Inside was Mary's resume. Emily had helped her type it at the library. It wasn't a long resume, mostly diner work, hotel cleaning, and housekeeping. But it was honest. Emily felt a strange sensation in her chest. It wasn't fear. It was something harder. It was a resolve that felt too big for her small body. She checked the clock. 7:45 a.m. The building was downtown, a 40-minute bus ride. Emily moved quietly. She went to her small closet. She didn't have a suit, but she had her church clothes. A navy blue skirt that was getting a little short, a white button-down shirt, and a gray cardigan. She put them on. She pulled her white socks up high and put on her black school shoes. They were scuffed at the toes. She went to the kitchen sink, wet a paper towel, and scrubbed the scuffs until the leather looked as dark as possible. Present yourself with dignity, Emily. Even if you have nothing in your pockets, you have pride in your spine. That was Grandpa Frank again. She walked back to the chair and picked up the leather folder. It was heavy in her hands. It smelled like old paper and tobacco, a smell that reminded her of safety. She scribbled a note on the back of an envelope and left it on the pillow next to her mother's head. Went to the store for soup. Be back soon. Love, Emmy. It was a lie, but a necessary one. If her mother knew the truth, she would try to stop her, or worse, try to get out of bed and collapse. Emily put the key around her neck on a string, took a deep breath, and walked out the door. The city was a beast. That was what Mary always called it. It was loud, indifferent, and fast. Emily sat on the hard plastic seat of the number 42 bus, clutching the folder to her chest like a shield. Her feet didn't quite touch the floor. The bus smelled of wet raincoats and diesel fumes. Across from her, a woman with tired eyes watched her. "No school today, honey?" the woman asked. Emily sat up straighter. "I have an important appointment," she said, using her best grown-up voice. The woman chuckled, a dry, humorless sound, and looked away. Emily looked out the window. The neighborhood of crumbling brick buildings and chain-link fences was slowly giving way to glass and steel. The people on the sidewalks changed too. They stopped wearing work boots and hoodies and started wearing trench coats and shiny shoes. They walked faster, looking at their phones, avoiding eye contact. Emily's stomach gave a nervous lurch. She hadn't eaten breakfast. There hadn't been enough milk for cereal, and she wanted to save the last slice of bread for her mom. Focus, she told herself. Mission objective. The bus hissed to a halt at 4th and Main. "Financial District," the driver grunted. Emily hopped down the steps. The wind hit her instantly. It was a cold, biting wind that whipped around the skyscrapers, channeling through the streets like a wind tunnel. It stung her cheeks and tugged at her ponytail. She shivered, pulling her thin cardigan tighter. She wished she had a coat, but her winter coat had a broken zipper and a stain on the front. It wouldn't look professional. She walked 2 blocks, checking the address on the back of her hand where she had written it in blue pen. And then, she saw it. The Miller Building. It was terrifying. It shot up into the sky, a monolith of black glass and chrome. It reflected the clouds, making it look like a piece of the storm itself had landed on the street. Men and women in dark suits flowed in and out of the revolving doors like a river of ants. Emily stopped at the bottom of the stairs. She felt very small. She was just a kid from the South Side with scuffed shoes and a hungry stomach. What was she doing? She touched the leather folder again. She felt the outline of the paper inside. "I am Mary Davis's daughter," she thought, "and I am Frank's granddaughter." She marched up the steps. The revolving door was heavy. She had to push with her shoulder to get it moving. She stumbled out into the lobby and stopped dead. It was warm inside, and it smelled of expensive coffee and floor wax. The ceiling was 3 stories high. A massive chandelier, shaped like a cascade of falling water, hung from the center. The floor was marble, so polished she could see her own reflection looking back at her, a small, blonde smudge in a world of giants. Security guards in blazers stood by the elevators. A reception desk, made of dark mahogany and spanning 20 feet, blocked the path to the rest of the building. Emily took a deep breath. She walked across the marble floor. Her rubber soles squeaked slightly, a tiny sound in the cavernous room. Behind the desk sat a woman who looked like she was made of iron. She had silver hair cut in a sharp bob, rimless glasses, and a headset. She was typing furiously. A nameplate on the desk read, "Mrs. Higgins, head of reception." Emily stopped in front of the desk. The desk was so high that her nose barely cleared the edge. She waited. Mrs. Higgins didn't look up. She kept typing. Emily cleared her throat. It was a small sound. Mrs. Higgins continued typing. Emily stood on her tiptoes. "Excuse me, ma'am." Mrs. Higgins paused. She peered over the top of her glasses, looking down. It took her a moment to locate the source of the voice. When she saw Emily, her eyebrows knit together in confusion. "Are you lost, child?" Mrs. Higgins asked. Her voice wasn't mean, but it was clipped, efficient. "The tour groups usually meet at the side entrance." "I am not with a tour group," Emily said. Her voice trembled slightly, but she steadied it. "I am here for an interview." Mrs. Higgins blinked. She stopped typing completely. "I beg your pardon?" "My name is Emily Davis. I am here for Mary Davis. She has an interview at 9 a.m. for the cleaning position." Mrs. Higgins sighed. She took off her headset and set it on the desk. "Where is your mother, Emily?" She is indisposed," Emily said, using a word she had read in a book. "She is very sick. But she needs this job. She is the hardest worker you will ever meet. So since she could not come, I came to bring her resume and answer your questions." Mrs. Higgins looked at the girl. She looked at the cheap cardigan, the scuffed shoes, the fierce determination in the blue eyes. For a second, her expression softened, but then the mask of the gatekeeper slammed back down. "That is very sweet, dear," Mrs. Higgins said, her voice dismissing. "But that is not how this works. We need to interview the actual employee, security protocols, insurance, common sense." "But the man on the phone said if she wasn't here, she would be disqualified," Emily insisted, holding up the leather folder. "I can't let that happen. Please, just take her paper. Just look at it." "I cannot accept a resume from a minor," Mrs. Higgins said, reaching for a phone on her desk. "I'm going to call security to have you escorted out. You can't be wandering around the lobby." "No!" The word burst out of Emily louder than she intended. Several people in the lobby turned to look. Emily felt her face heat up, but she didn't back down. She remembered the eviction notice. She remembered her mom coughing. "Please," Emily said, her voice dropping to an intense whisper. "You don't understand. My grandpa fought in the war. He taught me that you don't leave people behind. My mom is good, she's honest. She needs a chance. Just one chance." Mrs. Higgins hesitated. Her hand hovered over the phone. "What is all this noise?" The voice came from behind Emily. It was deep, resonant, and sounded like gravel grinding together. Mrs. Higgins's eyes went wide. She immediately stood up, straightening her blazer. "Mr. Miller." "Good morning, sir. I apologize for the disturbance. I was just handling a situation." Emily turned around slowly. Standing there was a man who seemed to take up all the air in the room. He was older, perhaps in his late 60s. He wore a charcoal suit that fit him perfectly. His hair was white, thick, and combed back, but it was his face that was terrifying. It was a face carved from granite, lined with deep creases. His eyes were dark and sharp, like a hawk searching for a field mouse. He held a takeaway coffee cup in one hand and a stack of papers in the other. He looked down at Emily. "A situation," the man repeated. He looked at Mrs. Higgins. "Since when do we have children shouting in the lobby, Martha?" "She was just leaving, Mr. Miller," Mrs. Higgins said quickly. "She came to, well, she claims she is here for a job interview." The man, Robert Miller, the billionaire owner of the building and the company, looked back down at Emily. He didn't smile. He didn't look amused. He looked annoyed. "A job interview," Miller said flatly. "You look a little young for the actuarial department." Emily felt her knees shaking. This was him, the boss, the man who owned everything. If she messed this up, it was over. She swallowed the lump in her throat. She gripped Grandpa Frank's leather folder so tight her knuckles turned white. "I'm 10, Emily said. She forced herself to look him in the eye, just like Grandpa said. "And I'm not here for the the math job. I'm here for the cleaning job." Miller raised an eyebrow. Is that so? Yes, sir, Emily said. My mom, Mary, was supposed to be here, but she's sick, and your man on the phone said she'd lose her spot, so I came. Miller stared at her. The lobby had gone quiet. People were pretending to look at their phones, but they were all listening. You came to interview for your mother? Miller asked. Yes. Do you know who I am? You're the boss, Emily said. I am. Miller took a sip of his coffee, his eyes never leaving hers. And do you know that my time is worth approximately $5,000 a minute? Emily's eyes widened. That's a lot. It is. So, give me one reason why I shouldn't have security put you on the next bus home and go about my day. Emily felt the panic rising. She thought about the cold apartment. She thought about the empty fridge. She thought about the medal hidden in her grandfather's drawer, the Purple Heart he never wore. She took a step forward. She held out the leather folder. Because, Emily said, her voice clear and ringing in the silent lobby. My mom isn't just a cleaner. She's a soldier too. She fights every day just to keep us safe, and she never complains. Not once. If you want someone who will quit when it gets hard, hire someone else. But if you want someone who will do the work no matter what, you need to look at this. She thrust the folder toward him. Miller looked at the battered leather. He saw the scuff marks on the girl's shoes. He saw the fraying cuffs of her cardigan. And then he looked at her face, a face full of terrifying, desperate hope. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then, slowly, Robert Miller reached out and took the folder. Robert Miller held the folder. His fingers, manicured and strong, brushed against the worn leather. He didn't open it immediately. Instead, he looked at Emily. He was assessing her, the way a general assesses the terrain before a battle. Follow me, he said. He turned and walked toward the bank of elevators. He didn't check to see if she was coming. He just assumed she would. Mrs. Higgins gasped. Mr. Miller? Sir? You have the board meeting in 10 minutes. Mr. Halloway is already waiting. Halloway can wait, Miller rumbled without breaking stride. Emily scrambled to catch up. Her rubber soles squeaked on the marble. She clutched her cardigan tight, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She passed the security guards, who looked confused, but stepped aside instantly for their boss. They stepped into the elevator. It was unlike any elevator Emily had ever seen. There were no buttons, just a sleek glass panel. The walls were mirrored. Emily saw herself reflected endlessly. A small, terrified girl in oversized clothes standing next to a titan of industry. The doors slid shut, sealing out the noise of the lobby. The silence was heavy. Miller pressed a spot on the glass panel. The elevator began to rise, smooth and fast. You said your grandfather was a soldier, Miller said. He didn't look at her. He stared straight ahead at the steel doors. Yes, sir, Emily answered. Sergeant Frank Davis. Miller's eye twitched, just a fraction. Army? Yes, sir, infantry. And he taught you to march into office buildings and demand meetings? He taught me that you don't retreat just because the enemy is bigger than you, Emily said. She remembered the quote perfectly. It was written on the back of the photo in her room. He said size is just geography. Spirit is what takes the hill. Miller slowly turned his head to look down at her. The elevator dinged softly as it passed the 40th floor. Spirit takes the hill, Miller repeated quietly. His voice sounded different, less like gravel, more like distant thunder. I haven't heard that phrase in a very long time. The doors opened onto the top floor. If the lobby was impressive, the executive floor was another world entirely. The carpet was thick and silent. The walls were lined with modern art that looked like splashes of angry paint. A view of the entire city sprawled out through floor-to-ceiling windows. A man in a blue suit was pacing in front of a receptionist's desk. He looked younger than Miller, maybe 40, with slicked-back hair and a watch that cost more than Emily's apartment building. This was Mr. Halloway. Robert, Halloway said, spinning around. Finally, the investors are… Who is this? Holloway looked at Emily with a mixture of amusement and distaste. He wrinkled his nose slightly, as if he smelled something unpleasant. This is Emily, Miller said, walking past him. She is currently the most interesting part of my morning. She's a child, Holloway scoffed, following them. Robert, we have to discuss the merger. We can't have stray children wandering the executive suite. It looks unprofessional. Should I call security? Miller stopped. He turned slowly to Holloway. James, Miller said softly, do you know why I built this company? Holloway blinked. To make money, Robert. To dominate the market. No, Miller said. I built it so I could do whatever I damn well please. And right now, I please to conduct an interview. He pointed a finger at the heavy oak door of his office. Wait here. Holloway's mouth snapped shut. He glared at Emily. Emily didn't glare back. She just stood straighter, mimicking Miller's posture. Miller opened the door and ushered Emily inside. The office was vast. A desk the size of a dining table sat in front of the window. There were 2 leather chairs facing it. Miller walked behind the desk and sat down. He gestured to a chair. Sit. Emily climbed into the chair. It was soft and swallowed her up. Her feet dangled inches above the floor. She placed her hands on her knees to stop them from shaking. Miller finally placed the leather folder on the desk. He opened it. The first thing he saw was the resume. It was neat, typed on plain paper. Mary Davis. Experience. Motel 6, 2018 to 2020. The Downtown Diner, 2020 to 2022. He scanned it. It was a humble list. There were gaps. The gaps usually meant trouble, addiction, prison, or laziness. Why the gaps? Miller asked, tapping the paper. 2016 to 2018, no work listed. That was when Grandpa got sick, Emily said instantly. Cancer. Mama quit her job at the grocery store to take care of him. She learned how to change his IVs. She learned how to lift him when he couldn't walk. She did it all by herself because nurses cost too much. Miller stopped reading. He looked at the girl. She quit a paying job to nurse a dying man? He wasn't just a man, Emily said fiercely. He was her dad. You don't leave family behind. Miller leaned back in his chair. The leather creaked. He looked out the window at the gray sky. And now she is sick, Miller said. It's pneumonia, Emily said. I think. She coughs until she can't breathe. She feels like fire, but she tried to get up this morning. She tried to put on her shoes. I had to hide them. You hid her shoes? Yes. If she came out in the cold, she would get worse. But we need the money. The landlord put the red paper on our door. The eviction notice? Miller noted. Yes, 3 days. Emily's voice wavered, but she swallowed hard and pushed the tears back. So I need you to give her the job. I can help her. I can scrub the floors until she gets better. I know how to clean. I do our whole apartment. I know you have to use the blue cleaner for glass and the yellow one for wood. Miller watched her. He had sat across from senators, CEOs, and warlords. He had seen men lie without blinking. He had seen greed in 1,000 different shades. But this was raw. It was unpolished, desperate integrity. He looked back down at the folder. He flipped the resume over. Underneath, loose in the pocket, was a photograph. Emily must have forgotten to take it out when she grabbed the folder. Miller froze. His hand, usually so steady, trembled slightly as he reached for the photo. It was an old black and white picture. A group of young men in muddy fatigues standing in front of a jeep. They looked exhausted, dirty, and young. Miller picked it up. He squinted at the faces. That's Grandpa, Emily said, pointing to the tall man on the left. Sergeant Frank. Miller didn't speak. His eyes moved from the face in the photo to the girl sitting across from him. He looked at her chin, the stubborn set of it. He looked at her eyes, bright blue, intelligent, fearless. He looked back at the photo, but he wasn't looking at Frank. He was looking at the skinny, terrified boy standing next to Frank. The boy with the helmet that was too big for his head. The boy holding a radio handset. Miller touched the face of the boy in the photo. "Private Miller," he whispered. Emily tilted her head. "What?" Miller cleared his throat. It was a rough, harsh sound. He placed the photo down gently, treating it like it was made of glass. "Your grandfather," Miller said, his voice thicker now. "He served in the 101st? The Screaming Eagles?" "Yes, sir. He said they were the best." "They were," Miller said. He stared at the desk. The memories were rushing back, unbidden. The smell of wet jungle, the noise of the mortars, the fear that tasted like copper in his mouth. He remembered a night in 1968, a ridgeline in the Ashau Valley. They were pinned down. He was 19 years old, a radio operator, and he had frozen. He couldn't move. The tracers were chewing up the ground around him. And then a hand had grabbed his vest. A strong hand. "Get up, Miller. Move your ass, son. We're not dying here today." Frank Davis. Frank had dragged him 50 yards through the mud to safety. Frank had taken a piece of shrapnel in the leg that night, the wound that gave him his limp. He had never mentioned it. He just wrapped it up and kept shooting. Miller looked at Emily. This girl was the granddaughter of the man who had saved his life. And now, the man who owned the sky was about to let the savior's daughter be thrown onto the street over a cleaning job. A bitter taste filled Miller's mouth. Shame. He had built an empire. He had billions in the bank. And Frank Davis had died poor, leaving a daughter and a granddaughter to starve in a drafty apartment. "Sir?" Emily asked. Did I do something wrong?" Miller blinked, snapping back to the present. He looked at the girl. She was twisting her hands in her lap, looking terrified that she had offended him. "No, Emily," Miller said. "You did everything right." He stood up. He walked to the window and looked down at the city. He felt old. He felt tired. But for the first time in years, he felt something else. A debt. A debt that was long overdue. He turned back to her. "You said your mother is at home?" "Yes, sir." "And she is alone?" "Yes. I left her a note." Miller pressed a button on his desk phone. "Holloway," he barked. The door opened instantly. Holloway stepped in, looking smug. "Ready to send her home, Robert? I have security on standby." "Cancel the board meeting," Miller said. Holloway's jaw dropped. "Excuse me?" "Robert, the Japanese investors are flying out tonight. We can't—" "I said cancel it," Miller roared. The power in his voice shook the room. "Reschedule it for next week. If they don't like it, tell them to find another partner." He grabbed his coat from the rack. He walked around the desk and extended a hand to Emily. "Come on, soldier," he said. Emily looked at the hand. It was large and calloused. She slid off the chair and took it. Her hand disappeared inside his. "Where are we going?" she asked. "We are going to conduct the second part of this interview," Miller said. "In person." "But my house is—" "It's not like this," Emily stammered, looking around the office. "It's small, and the heater is broken." Miller's face tightened. The thought of Frank's family freezing made his blood boil. "Then we will fix it," Miller said. He led her out of the office, past a stunned Holloway. "Robert, are you insane?" Holloway called after them. "Where are you going?" Miller didn't turn around. He walked Emily to the elevator. "I am going to pay a debt, James," Miller said as the doors closed. "A very old debt." The car was a black sedan, long and shiny. The seats were heated. Emily sat in the back, sinking into the leather. She had never been in a car that smelled like new shoes. Miller sat next to her. He was on his phone, barking orders. "Get Dr. Aris to the south side. I don't care if he's in surgery, get his partner. I want a pulmonologist at this address in 20 minutes. And tell the heating company I want a technician there too. Priority 1. He hung up and looked at Emily. She was staring at him with wide eyes. Is Dr. Eris a job interviewer too? She asked. A ghost of a smile touched Miller's lips. Something like that. The car moved smoothly through the city streets, gliding over potholes that would have rattled the bus apart. They left the shiny towers behind. The streets became narrower, the buildings gray and crumbling. Miller looked out the window. He saw the poverty. He saw the boarded-up windows. He wondered how many times Frank had walked these streets, limping on that bad leg, too proud to ask for help. Why didn't you call me, Frank? Miller thought. I would have given you the world. But he knew why. Frank was proud. Frank didn't take handouts. The car pulled up in front of Emily's building. It was a brick tenement, 4 stories high. The front door had peeling paint. A group of teenagers on the stoop stopped talking and stared at the luxury car. The driver, a large man named Samson, opened the door. Wait here, Samson, Miller said. Keep the engine running. Miller stepped out onto the cracked sidewalk. He adjusted his expensive suit. He looked completely out of place, like a diamond in a coal bin. Emily climbed out. It's on the 3rd floor. The elevator is broken. Lead the way, Miller said. They walked past the teenagers. One of them, a boy in a hoodie, stepped forward. Nice ride, old man, the boy sneered. You lost? Miller stopped. He turned his head slowly. He gave the boy the same look he had given the board of directors when they tried to vote him out in '95. A look of absolute, terrifying coldness. I am exactly where I intend to be, Miller said. Step aside, son. The boy hesitated, saw the look in Miller's eyes, the eyes of a man who had seen things the boy couldn't imagine, and stepped back. Emily led him up the stairs. The stairwell smelled of old cooking oil and damp concrete. They climbed to the 3rd floor. Emily reached for the key around her neck. Her hands were shaking. She was suddenly afraid. What if her mom was mad? What if the apartment was too messy? What if Miller fired them before they even started? She unlocked the door and pushed it open. The apartment was freezing. It was colder inside than it was in the hallway. Mama? Emily called out softly. There was no answer. Panic flared in Emily's chest. She dropped her grandfather's folder and ran toward the bedroom. Mama! Miller followed her, his heavy footsteps thudding on the thin floorboards. They entered the bedroom. Mary was lying on the bed, tangled in the sheets. Her face was flushed a deep, unnatural red, but her lips were blue. She was shivering violently, her teeth chattering with a sound that filled the room. She won't wake up, Emily cried, shaking her mother's shoulder. Mama, please! Miller moved instantly. He pushed past Emily, not roughly, but with urgency. He stripped off his expensive charcoal suit jacket and threw it over Mary. He placed the back of his hand against her cheek. She's burning up, Miller said grimly. Septic fever. He turned to Emily. The little girl was standing by the bed, tears finally spilling over, her bravery cracking under the weight of her mother's silence. Emily, Miller said. His voice was sharp, commanding. I need you to be a soldier right now. Can you do that? Emily sniffed, wiping her nose on her sleeve. She looked at her mom, then at Miller. She nodded. Good. Go to the bathroom. Get a towel. Wet it with cold water. Bring it here. Emily ran. Miller pulled his phone out. He dialed Samson. Forget the doctor coming here, Miller barked. We're bringing her down. Call the hospital. Tell them Robert Miller is coming in with a critical patient. I want a trauma team in the bay. Now. He hung up. He looked down at the woman in the bed. She looked so much like Frank. The same nose, the same chin. Hang on, Mary, Miller whispered. I got you. The cavalry is here. Emily ran back in with the wet towel. Miller took it and gently wiped Mary's forehead. Samson is coming up to help me carry her, Miller told Emily. "We are taking her to the hospital." "But," Emily's voice was small, "we don't have insurance. The hospital said last time." Miller looked at the child. He reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Emily," he said, "you let me worry about the bills. Your job is to hold her hand. Understood?" "Yes, sir." Samson, the driver, appeared in the doorway, filling the frame. He was a giant of a man. "Sir?" "Wrap her in the quilt, Samson. Gentle. She's fragile." As Samson lifted Mary as easily as if she were a doll, Miller saw something on the bedside table. It was the note Emily had left. "Went to the store for soup." And next to it, a small, worn Bible. Miller picked up the Bible. He opened the cover. Inside, in faded ink, was the inscription, "To Mary. Faith is the evidence of things not seen. Love, Dad. Da Nang, 1969. Miller closed the book and put it in his pocket. He looked at the empty, cold room one last time. "Let's go," he said. The emergency room sliding doors blasted open. It wasn't the usual entrance. Usually, you walk in, take a number, and wait for 6 hours while holding a paper cup. But not when you are with Robert Miller. Dr. Aris, the chief of medicine, was waiting at the doors. He was a tall man with gray temples and a serious face. He didn't look at the insurance forms. He looked at Miller. "Trauma 1 is prepped, Robert," Dr. Aris said. "We have the infectious disease specialist en route." Samson carried Mary in. She looked so small in his arms, wrapped in the expensive quilt like a broken bird. Emily ran alongside them, her hand clutching the edge of the quilt. "It's okay, Mama. We're here. The fancy doctor is here." They swept through the hallways. Nurses stepped back. Orderlies stopped their carts. It was a phalanx of power moving through the sterile white corridors. They reached the trauma room. A team of nurses in blue scrubs swarmed Mary. "Oxygen saturation is 82%, a nurse called out. "BP is dropping, 70/40. "She's septic," Dr. Aris barked. "Start 2 lines. Broad-spectrum antibiotics. Get the cooling blanket." A nurse gently pushed Emily back toward the door. "You have to wait outside, sweetie. Let us work." Emily dug her heels into the linoleum. "No, I have to stay. She doesn't like the dark. She gets scared." Miller stepped forward. He placed his large hands on Emily's shoulders. He didn't pull her away. He just held her steady. "Emily," he said. His voice was low, cutting through the beeping monitors and the shouting. "Stand down, soldier." Emily looked up at him, tears streaming down her face, cutting tracks through the grime on her cheeks. "But she's all I have," she whispered. "If she goes, I'm by myself." The fear in her voice broke Miller's heart. It cracked the granite shell he had built around himself for 40 years. "She is in the best hands in the world," Miller said. "And you are not by yourself. You are with me." He gently guided her out of the room. The heavy doors swung shut, cutting off the view of Mary's pale face. The private family waiting room on the 4th floor was quiet. It didn't smell like a hospital. It smelled like lavender and silence. There was a coffee machine that ground fresh beans, and the chairs were soft leather. It had been 4 hours. Emily sat in a chair that was too big for her. She had her knees pulled up to her chest. She was still clutching the leather folder. Miller stood by the window, looking out at the parking lot below. He had loosened his tie. He had rolled up his sleeves. For the first time in decades, he looked like a working man, not a statue. He watched the girl's reflection in the glass. She hadn't moved. She hadn't asked for food. She just watched the door. She has Frank's discipline, Miller thought, and his stubbornness. He walked over to the coffee machine and poured a cup of hot chocolate. He walked over to Emily and held it out. "Drink," he said. Emily looked at the cup. "I can't pay for that." Miller let out a short, dry chuckle. It was a rusty sound. "It's on the house. Drink it. It will keep you warm." She took the cup with both hands. The steam warmed her face. She took a small sip. "Mr. Miller?" she asked softly. Call me Robert. Mr. Robert, why did you help us? Miller sat down in the chair opposite her. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He looked tired. Because I owed a debt, he said. A very big debt, and I am a man who pays his bills. To my grandpa? Yes, to Frank. Miller looked at his hands. We were young, younger than I realized at the time. We were in a bad place, Emily. A very bad place. And I was scared. Grandpa said fear is a reaction, Emily recited automatically. Yes, Miller smiled sadly. He told me that too, that night. He told me that right before he ran into the fire to pull me out. He didn't have to. I was just a kid from the city. He was a farm boy from Kansas. We had nothing in common. But he came back for me. He looked at Emily intensely. He never told you? No. Emily shook her head. He never talked about the war, only about the funny parts, like the time he stole a chicken. Miller laughed. A genuine laugh this time. That chicken. I remember that chicken. It was the toughest bird I ever ate. The laughter faded into a comfortable silence. He died poor, Miller said, the bitterness creeping back into his voice. I checked the records while we were waiting. No pension, no benefits. Why? The papers got lost, Emily said simply. There was a fire at the record center in St. Louis. That's what they said. He wrote letters. Mama wrote letters. But they said they couldn't prove he was there without the papers. Miller's jaw tightened. They couldn't prove it. No. So he worked at the hardware store until his leg got too bad. Then he sat in the chair and told me stories. Miller stood up and walked to the window again. His anger was a cold, hard thing in his chest. A hero of the United States Army denied his due because of paperwork, while Miller sat in a glass tower making millions. The door opened. It wasn't the doctor. It was James Halloway. Halloway looked flustered. He was holding a tablet. Robert, Halloway hissed, closing the door behind him. This is getting ridiculous. The Japanese investors are threatening to pull out. You've been gone all day. And for what? A janitor? Miller turned slowly. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. A janitor, Miller repeated. Yes, a cleaning lady. Halloway waved his hand at Emily. And her kid. Look, write them a check. Give them $5,000. That's a fortune to people like this. Then let's get back to the office. Emily shrank back in her chair. She felt the shame burning her cheeks. People like this. Miller walked toward Halloway. He walked calmly, but there was a menace in his stride that made Halloway take a step back. James, Miller said softly, do you know what this girl did today? She interrupted a meeting? She walked into a lion's den to save her mother, Miller said. She showed more courage in 10 minutes than you have shown in your entire Ivy League career. Robert, be reasonable. I am being reasonable. I am realizing that I have surrounded myself with people who know the price of everything and the value of nothing. Miller snatched the tablet from Halloway's hand. He looked at the merger numbers on the screen. He tapped a few buttons and deleted the file. Robert! Halloway screamed. That was the only copy! Then you better start typing, Miller said. But not here. You're fired, James. You can't fire me. I own 51% of the stock. I can fire God if he works for me. Get out. Send your badge to security. Halloway gaped. He looked at Miller, then at Emily. He turned red, then pale. He spun on his heel and stormed out. Miller took a deep breath. He adjusted his cuffs. He looked at Emily. Sorry about that, he said. Just taking out the trash. It was evening when Dr. Aris finally came in. He looked exhausted, but he was smiling. She turned the corner, he said. Emily dropped her cup. It bounced on the carpet. Is she okay? She is sleeping. The fever broke about 20 minutes ago. The antibiotics are working fast. She's strong, your mom. She has a fighter's heart. Emily let out a sob, a loud, ugly, wonderful sob of relief. Can I see her? Briefly. She needs rest. Miller stood up. Go ahead, Emily. I'll wait here. Emily ran to the door, then stopped. She looked back at the billionaire. Come with me, she said. Please, she needs to know. Miller hesitated. He felt unworthy to walk into that room. But he couldn't say no to those eyes. They walked into the room. It was dim. The machines were beeping rhythmically, a steady, reassuring pulse. Mary was propped up on pillows. She looked pale, but the terrible flush was gone. Her eyes were open, groggy and confused. Emmy? She rasped. Mama! Emily scrambled onto the bed, careful of the tubes. She buried her face in her mother's neck. Mary stroked her daughter's hair. Her eyes traveled up to the man standing at the foot of the bed. A man in a suit that cost more than she would make in 10 years. Who? Mary whispered. Mrs. Davis, Miller said. He took a step forward. He didn't bow, but he lowered his head in respect. I am Robert Miller. Mary's eyes widened. The interview. I missed it. I'm so sorry. Please, I can work. I just need a few days. Shh, Miller said, gentle. Stop. There is no interview. Mary's face fell. She closed her eyes. I understand. I understand. No, Miller said. You don't understand. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the old photo, the one of the squad in Vietnam. He held it up. You know this picture? Mary squinted. That's my dad's squad, the Screaming Eagles. Do you know who the skinny kid next to him is? Mary looked. She looked at the man in the suit. She looked back at the photo. That's you? That's me, Miller said. His voice cracked. Your father carried me 2 miles on a shattered leg. He saved my life, Mary. And I never said thank you. Tears welled up in Mary's eyes. He talked about a Bobby. He said Bobby was the only one who could play poker worth a damn. Miller laughed, and tears ran down his granite cheeks. I was Bobby. I am Bobby. He reached out and took Mary's hand. It was rough, calloused from years of scrubbing floors. I am sorry I wasn't there, Miller said. I am sorry you had to struggle. But that ends today, right now. 3 days later. Mary was discharged. She sat in a wheelchair, though she said she could walk. Emily pushed her. Miller walked beside them. They didn't go to the bus stop. Samson was waiting with the car. Where are we going? Mary asked. Our apartment. The landlord probably changed the locks by now. We aren't going to the apartment, Miller said. But my things. Moved, Miller said. Samson took care of it yesterday. Everything is packed. Packed? To where? Miller signaled Samson to drive. They drove out of the city toward the green suburbs. They pulled into a long driveway lined with oak trees. At the end stood a house. It wasn't a mansion, but it was beautiful. White brick, blue shutters, a big porch. Robert, Mary said, panic rising. I can't accept this. I can't. It's too much. Charity is one thing, but… It's not charity, Miller interrupted. He turned in the front seat to face them. He pulled a thick envelope from his jacket pocket. This, Miller said, is back pay. What? I calculated your father's hazard pay, with interest, compounding from 1969 to present, plus the benefits he was denied, plus a consultant fee for saving the CEO of Miller Enterprises. He handed her the envelope. It was heavy. And, Miller continued, I have a job offer, if you want it. Mary wiped her eyes. The cleaning job? Miller shook his head. No, I canceled that position. I realized I don't need a cleaner. I have plenty of those. He looked at Emily, then back at Mary. I am opening a new division of the company, the Frank Davis Veteran Assistance Program. Its sole purpose is to find people like your father, veterans who fell through the cracks, and fix it, cut through the red tape, pay their bills, get them home. Mary stared at him. I need a director, Miller said. Someone who knows the struggle. Someone who knows how to stretch a dollar and how to fight for family. Someone who won't take no for an answer from the government. He smiled at Emily. And I need a junior consultant, Miller added. Someone to keep the director in line. Mary looked at the house. She looked at the check. She looked at her daughter, who was grinning so wide her face hurt. I don't know anything about running a foundation, Mary said. You kept a family alive on minimum wage in a city that wanted to crush you, Miller said. Running a foundation is easy compared to that. You have the job, Mary, if you want it. Mary took a deep breath. She looked at the photo of her father that Miller had framed and placed on the dashboard. Fear is a reaction. Courage is a decision. When do I start? Mary asked. Monday, Miller smiled. Now let's go see your new kitchen. I believe Emily said something about you making the best apple pie in the state. I intend to verify that claim. The boardroom was full. Men in suits sat around the table. But at the head of the table sat Mary Davis, wearing a sharp navy blazer. Next to her sat Emily, wearing a school uniform, doing her homework quietly. The numbers for the veteran housing project are in, Mary said, her voice strong and clear. We housed 400 families this month. Applause broke out around the table. At the back of the room, Robert Miller stood watching. He wasn't running the meeting. He didn't need to. He looked at the scene. He saw the life that had come from a simple act of courage. He thought about the day Emily walked into the lobby. A 10-year-old girl with scuffed shoes and a terrified heart, armed with nothing but love for her mother. She hadn't just saved her mother. She had saved him. She had pulled him out of his glass tower and back into the world of the living. Miller walked over to Emily. He placed a hand on her shoulder. She looked up and smiled. Good work today, soldier, he whispered. Thanks, Grandpa Bobby, she whispered back. They say you can't choose your family. But sometimes, life gives you a chance to choose again. Robert Miller had billions, but he was a pauper until a little girl walked through his door. It didn't take a resume to change the world. It just took a daughter who wouldn't give up. It is never too late to pay a debt. It is never too late to do the right thing. And sometimes, the smallest soldiers fight the biggest battles. And so, the story of the little girl with scuffed shoes and a fighter's heart comes to a close. Emily proved that courage isn't about size. It's about the decision to keep climbing when the hill gets steep. I hope this story gave you a moment to pause and reflect on the quiet heroes in your own life. I'd love to hear from you. Where were you while listening to Emily's journey? Maybe you were relaxing with a warm drink or just winding down after a long day. Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. If this story touched you, please hit like and subscribe so we can share more moments like this together. Your feedback helps us grow. Thanks for watching.